It's the Headless Horseman, the one I heard tell of in ghastly stories.
The very same!
Since you're holding a detached but animated head, do you use it? You know, like on yourself.
What?
Possible silver lining here. It's like they always say, when life hands you a severed head, you put the mouth on your dingus.
This may surprise a lot of you, but I've never been a Tim Burton fan. I know this puts me in a small minority of movie fans. No matter how hard I've tried, I just can't see his appeal as a filmmaker.
You're an idiot!
In fact, if I'm being totally honest, his movies are at best tolerable and at worst unwatchable.
No, you are, but what am I? No, you are, but what am I?
I know you are, but what am I? Infinity!
But there is one exception, a bright light shining in the dark, desaturated, leafless landscape of a Tim Burton movie. Do you like pale people? Because I've got a movie just for you. Hold on to your heads, kids, because this is another extra long, extra spooky, spoiler-heavy look at Sleepy Hollow. So Sleepy Hollow starts like any great movie, with a decapitation, and then quickly transitions to a dark 18th century New York City, where we meet police constable Ichabod Crane, who despite looking confused most of the time, is a brilliant detective.
I found something. A map.
So he's sent to the small town of Sleepy Hollow to test his detective prowess. You see, there have been 3 grisly murders in Sleepy Hollow where the victims have been found with their heads cut off. And with no witnesses and no suspects, the locals are desperate to stop whoever is responsible. When he finally arrives, he notices that Sleepy Hollow is no ordinary town. The residents are in hiding, the businesses have been boarded up, and even the local Waffle House lays abandoned. Eventually, Ichabod makes his way to the Van Tassel home, where he meets Katrina, played by the original Jenna Ortega, Christina Ricci, and there he has a meeting with the leaders of the town, played by some very familiar faces. There's Harry Potter alumni Michael Gambon and Richard Griffiths, Michael Gough, who you probably know as Michael Keaton's Alfred, Ian McDermott, and Jeffrey Jones, who is famous for... Anyway, during their meeting, they give Ichabod the backstory of the Headless Horseman, who is played by Christopher Walken, and, like Christopher Walken, is a blood-crazed maniac who loves cutting off people's heads and has pointed teeth.
And a cock and a walk, baby!
One day, while running away from the colonial army, he was captured, beheaded, and buried in the now haunted woods, and now he rides at night, taking people's heads. Despite all this, Ichabod is unshaken and declares that the killer is a man and not a ghost story. Unfortunately for the town's night watchman, the horseman didn't get that memo because that night,
his kappa is detated from his head.
After Ichabod's initial investigation of the murder produces no results, he gets a clue from the Reverend, and with the help of the now orphaned Masbeth boy, decides to perform an autopsy on one of the horseman's first 3 victims, the widow Winship. And it's here that he makes a shocking discovery.
She's a squirter!
And that the widow was pregnant. That night, Katrina informs Ichabod that everyone in Sleepy Hollow is related.
Because there is hardly a household in Sleepy Hollow that is not connected to every other by blood or marriage.
And while confronting the magistrate Phillips about the widow's condition, the horseman arrives, killing the magistrate and proving to Ichabod that he is indeed real. Ichabod then decides that he needs to go to the haunted woods to get to the bottom of the horseman's killing spree, and as he and young Masbeth ride deep into the woods, they hear a witch singing in the distance. And after riding a bit further, they find the horseman's remains, except for his head, leaving Ichabod to conclude that the horseman is under the control of the one who has his head. But his investigation comes to an abrupt end as the horseman rides again, searching for his next victim.
I gotta have more cowbell!
Back in town, the horseman does his best Stone Cold Steve Austin impression, and then brutally kills the entire Killian family. As the horseman tries to leave, he's stopped by Brom, who does a great Lee Harvey Oswald impression. But since you can't kill what is already dead, the horseman makes quick work of him, splitting him like the check on a bad first date. After being wounded by the horseman, Ichabod is not feeling great and is told by the doctor that he has a fever.
And the only prescription It's more cowbell.
After Ichabod recovers, he confronts the notary Hardenbrook, who finally admits that there has been a conspiracy
That turned the friggin' frogs gay.
behind the killings all along. The next night, a town meeting is called at the church to discuss what must be done about the horseman. But before the Van Tassels can make it there, the horseman appears behind Lady Van Tassel and seemingly kills her. Inside the church, Dr. Lancaster tries to come clean about what everyone has been hiding, but he's killed in the process by the Reverend, who is then killed by Baltus, who is then killed by a YouTube moderator due to misinformation.
There's a conspiracy here.
The next morning, with all of the conspirators dead, Ichabod decides to return to New York, but at the last minute decides to investigate the death of Lady Von Tassel, and there he makes a shocking discovery. It turns out Lady Von Tassel was controlling the horseman all along. Finally, the horseman arrives to kill Katrina, but luckily for her, Ichabod returns to save the day, and they lure the horseman back into the woods to the Tree of the Dead. As Lady Von Tassel recaptures Katrina and offers her up to the horseman, Ichabod tackles her by surprise.
Gotcha, bitch.
And then he gives the horseman back his head, who kidnaps Lady Von Tassel and takes her back to hell with him. A few days later, with the case solved, Ichabod returns to New York with Katrina and young Masbeth. And as they admire the snow-covered streets of the big city, they are immediately stabbed by vagrants. So, what is it about this movie that I like so much? Well, it all comes down to this. Hammer Film Productions was a British film studio that became famous in the 1970s for taking the old black and white horror movies of the 1930s and remaking them using bright colors, epic sound, and, for the day, extreme violence. Growing up, I absolutely loved Hammer Horror Pictures. Back in the day, when AMC stood for American Movie Classics, they used to play old Hammer movies late into the night on Saturdays. And when I could catch them, they were a highlight of my week. So, when I saw Sleepy Hollow for the first time, I was delighted to see that Tim Burton had pretty much made a modern Hammer film. From the shot composition, the set design, and the use of bright blood, this entire movie is an homage to this once great movie studio. There's even a cameo by Hammer legend Christopher Lee at the beginning of the movie as the judge that sends Ichabod to Sleepy Hollow, which was a great treat for me to see when I first saw this movie so many years ago. And honestly, when rewatching this film, I thought my appreciation for Sleepy Hollow and what Tim Burton was trying to do would lessen over time. But in fact, it hasn't. It still captures the spirit of Hammer Horror Pictures, and it was just as much fun to see now as it was 24 years ago. If you haven't seen it, I certainly recommend it. And if you haven't seen any Hammer horror movies, I recommend those as well. They are old and they can be hard to find, but you can watch Dracula on YouTube if you search for it. Check it out. I think you will like it. Well, that's it for this one, kids. Have you seen Sleepy Hollow? What did you think about it? Leave a comment below. Let me know. As always, thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.